Breaking December 4th, 2025. Nigel Farage just shattered British political history, £9 million. One man, one donation, the largest ever from a living donor to a UK political party, and it didn't go to Labour. It didn't go to the Conservatives. It went to Reform UK, the insurgent party threatening to tear down the establishment brick by brick, while Britain slept last night. The Electoral Commission released figures that would send shockwaves through Westminster by dawn. Reform UK, the party dismissed as fringe chaos just 3 years ago, has now outspent Labour and the Conservatives combined. In a single quarter, this isn't just about money, it's about momentum, it's about power. And tonight, the old guard realizes something terrifying. Farage isn't playing the game anymore. He's rewriting the rules. If you want the full breakdown of what happened in the last 72 hours and what it means for Britain's future, hit subscribe now. Because what you're about to hear could reshape the next election before a single vote is cast. At 7:30 am this morning, journalists across Westminster received the Electoral Commission's quarterly donation report, and within minutes, the political world caught fire. To understand why this donation matters, you have to understand who Christopher Harborne is and why his money moves mountains. He's not a household name. He prefers it that way. British-born but Thailand-based for over 20 years, Harborne is a billionaire who made his fortune in aviation fuel and defense technology. He has stakes in private aircraft companies, fuel distributors, and most controversially cryptocurrency, specifically Tether, one of the world's largest stablecoins. But his real power, his willingness to bankroll political earthquakes. In 2019, when Brexit was teetering on the edge of collapse, Harborne poured over £10 million into Nigel Farage's Brexit party. Not in small trenches, not over years, in massive, seismic chunks. He became the single biggest individual funder of the Brexit movement outside of government itself. When Boris Johnson won his landslide that December, Harborne switched teams. He donated hundreds of thousands to the Conservatives under Johnson's leadership. He even accompanied Johnson on a private trip to Ukraine after the former Prime Minister left Downing Street, a journey funded, in part, by Harborne's £1 million contribution to Johnson's office. This is a man who doesn't just donate. He invests in movements, in disruption, in chaos that bends toward his vision of Britain. And now, he's chosen Nigel Farage. Again, the £9 million donation wasn't made yesterday. It was registered on August 1st, 3 months ago. But it was only revealed today when the Electoral Commission published its third quarter figures. Between July and September 2025, Reform UK raised over £10 million in total. More than Labour, more than the Liberal Democrats. And for the first time since the general election, more than the Conservatives. Let that sink in. The Tories, Britain's oldest political machine, with its sprawling donor network and decades of institutional relationships, outfunded by a party that didn't even exist in its current form 5 years ago, Reform UK received £10.2 million. The Conservatives? Just £4.6 million. Labour scraped together £2.1 million, mostly from trade unions. The Liberal Democrats managed £1 million. The gap isn't close. It's a chasm. But this was no ordinary quarter. This was the build-up to Reform UK's autumn conference in Birmingham, where Farage stood before thousands of supporters and declared that his party would be the voice of the forgotten millions, where he promised to make Britain the first Western nation to adopt a national Bitcoin reserve, where he painted a vision of a Britain freed from Brussels, freed from woke ideology, freed from the establishment that had betrayed the working class for decades. And behind that vision, Christopher Harborne's £9 million. The money didn't come in Bitcoin, despite Reform being the first UK party to accept cryptocurrency donations. It was cold, hard cash. Traditional, legal, unstoppable. Harborne's donation smashed a previous record for a living donor. £8 million given by supermarket tycoon Lord David Sainsbury to the Liberal Democrats back in 2019. That donation was historic. It made headlines. But it didn't change the game. This one might. Because Reform isn't just a protest vote anymore. It isn't just angry voters in left-behind towns waving flags at rallies. It's becoming something far more dangerous to the establishment. A legitimate contender. Since the spring, Reform UK has been leading or competing in national opinion polls. Not third place, not distant fourth. Neck and neck with Labour in some surveys, ahead of the Conservatives in others. Polling experts have been baffled. Political strategists have been scrambling. And tonight, they're terrified, because money doesn't just buy adverts. It buys ground operations. It buys data. It buys candidates in every marginal seat. It buys legitimacy, and Farage knows it. He's been here before. In 2014, when UKIP surged and forced David Cameron into promising a Brexit referendum. In 2016, when that referendum tore the country in half. In 2019, when the Brexit Party obliterated the Tories in the European elections and forced Boris Johnson to embrace hard Brexit or face annihilation every time, the establishment dismissed him. Every time, they were wrong. And now, with Harborne's war chest and a Conservative Party still reeling from its worst ever general election defeat, Farage isn't knocking on the door anymore. He's kicking it down. But there's more to this story than just money. Because Christopher Harborne's wealth isn't clean-cut aviation fuel and private jets. It's tangled in cryptocurrency, specifically Tether, which investigations by Britain's National Crime Agency have linked to Russian war financing in Ukraine. Court documents show Harborne took a 12% stake in Tether around 2016. What share of its profits he's received since? Unknown. Whether he knew about illicit activity? No evidence suggests he did, but the optics are toxic. A billionaire tied to crypto potentially funding Russian sanctions evasion, now pouring millions into a British political party whose leader has repeatedly praised Vladimir Putin and questioned Western support for Ukraine. Transparency International called the donation extraordinary. Spotlight on corruption demanded a cap on political donations. Labour MPs muttered about dark money. Even some Conservative backbenchers quietly, nervously, whispered that this was dangerous. But Reform UK? They called it incredible progress. Because while Westminster clutched its pearls, Farage was already 3 steps ahead. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't distancing himself. He was doubling down. At a press conference this afternoon, Reform's honorary treasurer Nick Kendy, himself a major donor, stood beside Farage and smiled. This shows, he said, that the British people are ready for change. And they're willing to back it. The British people didn't donate £9 million. Christopher Harborne did, but in British politics, that distinction doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this. Reform UK now has the resources to fight the next general election, still 4 years away, as a genuine, funded, organized political force. Not a protest movement. Not a spoiler. A contender. And the Conservative Party, bleeding members and money and hope, is staring at its worst nightmare. A two-front war. Labour on the left, Reform on the right, and Nigel Farage, grinning in the middle, holding a cheque for £9 million. By mid-morning, Westminster was in chaos. The corridors of Parliament echoed with hurried footsteps and urgent whispers. MPs huddled in clusters outside committee rooms, scrolling frantically through their phones. Conservative WhatsApp groups exploded with panic. Labour strategists convened emergency calls. And across Britain, from Glasgow to Cornwall, from newsrooms to kitchen tables, the same question burned on everyone's lips. What the hell just happened? The Electoral Commission's data release was supposed to be routine. Quarterly donation figures, dry, bureaucratic, the kind of story that gets buried on page 17. Not today. At 9:47 am, the BBC pushed a breaking news alert. Reform UK receives record £9 million donation, largest ever from living person, within minutes. Sky News went live from College Green. ITV interrupted its morning programming. The Guardian's live politics blog lit up with updates every 30 seconds. The Telegraph called it a political earthquake. The Times, Farage's war chest eclipses rivals. But it wasn't just the media. It was everyone. On X, formerly Twitter, the hashtag Reform donation was trending within the hour. Farage supporters flooded the platform with Union Jacks and victory emojis. This is what momentum looks like, one user wrote, retweeted thousands of times. Another, the establishment is terrified. Good. But the backlash was just as fierce. £9 million from one man, a Labour activist posted. This isn't democracy. This is oligarchy. Who is Christopher Harborne? Asked another. And why is a billionaire living in Thailand deciding Britain's future? Campaign groups moved fast. By 10:30 am, Transparency International UK had issued a statement calling for urgent reform. When single donations reach these extraordinary levels, said Rose Zussman, their senior policy manager, it reinforces the public's belief that money talks loudest in the corridors of power. Spotlight on corruption went further. These levels of donations should have no place in our politics, said Executive Director Susan Hawley, whichever party they go to. But the anger wasn't just coming from the left. Inside Conservative campaign headquarters, known grimly as CCHE, senior officials were reeling. One former cabinet minister, speaking to reporters on background, didn't hide the dread. This changes everything, they said. We thought we had time to rebuild. We thought reform would fade. We were wrong, because the numbers didn't lie. Since July 2024, the Conservatives had raised £14.4 million in total donations. Reform UK, £13.5 million. Just £900,000 behind and closing fast. But that gap was an illusion, because Reform's momentum was accelerating while the Tories were hemorrhaging support. Membership down, poll numbers down, morale down. And now, donations lagging behind a party that didn't even win a single seat in Parliament until 2024.by lunchtime. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader who'd promised to rebuild the party after its catastrophic election defeat, was forced to respond, standing outside Tory HQ. Flanked by anxious aides, Badenoch tried to sound confident. "We've been out raising other parties throughout this year," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying concern. Mr. Harborne's donation to Reform was a one-off. "If you look at the breadth and depth of our donors, and the trend, I'm really pleased. But journalists weren't buying it. Leader, are you worried Reform could overtake you financially?" One shouted. "Do you regret losing Harborne as a Tory donor? Is the Conservative Party losing the funding war?" Badenoch deflected, smiled tightly, walked back inside. But the damage was done. Because across the country, Conservative MPs were watching. And they were terrified. In marginal seats, those razor-thin constituencies that swing elections, Tory MPs were doing the math. Reform UK now had the resources to run professional, well-funded campaigns in every seat they wanted. Ground teams, leaflets, adverts, data analysts, the works, and in a first-past-the-post system, that didn't mean Reform had to win. They just had to split the vote. Pull enough Conservative voters to let Labour through the middle. It was the Tories' nightmare scenario. And it was becoming real. One Conservative MP, speaking anonymously to The Spectator, put it bluntly, "We're staring at obliteration. Labour on one side, Reform on the other. And we're stuck in the middle with no money, no message, and no hope." But the shockwaves weren't confined to Westminster. In pubs across England, in online forums, in workplaces and WhatsApp groups, ordinary Britons were digesting the news. And reactions were splitting cleanly down political lines. In Clacton, Farage's own constituency, where Reform won its first seat in the 2024 election, supporters were jubilant. "About bloody time," said one voter outside a local cafe. "The establishment's had it too good for too long. Farage is bringing real change." In Birmingham, at a Reform UK members' meeting, the mood was electric. Cheers, applause, chants of Nigel. Nigel, one attendee, a former Labour voter, told a journalist, "I've never felt this hopeful about politics in my life. This donation proves people with real money believe in what we're doing." But in London, in university towns, in Labour heartlands, the reaction was visceral. "This is corruption in plain sight," said a teacher in Manchester. "One billionaire shouldn't be able to buy a political party." A student in Bristol posted a TikTok that went viral within hours. £9 million. From a guy who lives in Thailand, who made money off crypto, who has ties to a coin linked to Russian war crimes. And Farage says this is democracy? This is a joke. The Labour Party, sensing an opening, pounced. Shadow ministers flooded morning shows, calling the donation deeply troubling. One junior minister described it as oligarchic influence over British politics. But quietly, behind closed doors, Labour strategists were nervous. Because they knew something the public didn't yet fully grasp: money wins elections. And Reform UK now had more of it than them. By early afternoon, Nigel Farage himself took to the airwaves. He appeared on GB News, the broadcaster he'd helped launch, the network that had become Reform's de facto media arm. Sitting relaxed in the studio, trademark grin on his face, Farage didn't just defend the donation. He celebrated it. "This is what happens," he said, leaning forward, "when you offer real change, when you speak for the forgotten millions. When you refuse to bow to the establishment." The host asked about Harborne's cryptocurrency ties. Farage didn't flinch. "Christopher Harborne is a British patriot who believes in this country's future. He's donated to multiple parties over the years. He's transparent. He's legal. And he's backing us because he knows we're the only party willing to fight for Britain's sovereignty." But the links to Tether are irrelevant. Farage interrupted. "Investing in cryptocurrency doesn't make you a criminal. And let me remind you, Reform UK is the first party in this country to embrace the future of finance. We announced plans for a national Bitcoin reserve. We're looking forward, not backward." The interview clip spread like wildfire. Farage supporters shared it endlessly. Critics called it deflection, but the message was clear. Farage wasn't apologizing. He wasn't retreating. He was accelerating. BYPM. Reform UK released an official statement. It was short, pointed, triumphant. Today's figures show the incredible progress Reform UK is making. We have the momentum, we have the support, and we have the resources to fight for Britain's future. The establishment is rattled. Good, because real change doesn't come from Westminster insiders. It comes from the people and the patriots willing to back them. But beneath the bravado, something else was happening. In focus groups conducted that evening by pollsters across Britain, one theme kept emerging: distrust. Not just of reform. Of all of it. Politicians are all the same, said a focus group participant in Leeds. Doesn't matter if it's Labour, Tories, or Farage, they're all bought by someone. I don't trust Harborne, said another in Cardiff. But I don't trust Labour's union money either, or Tory hedge fund donors. It's all rigged. This was the dangerous undercurrent. The £9 million donation wasn't just energizing reform space. It was deepening Britain's cynicism, widening the gap between voters and Westminster, confirming for millions that politics was a game played by the rich, for the rich. And in that cynicism, Farage saw opportunity. Because if people believed the system was broken, if they believed money controlled everything, that all politicians were corrupt, then why not vote for the one who admitted it? The one who said, yes, the game is rigged, so let's burn it down? That night, as the sun set over London, the political landscape had shifted. Reform UK wasn't a fringe movement anymore. It was a juggernaut, and Britain was holding its breath. By PM, the story exploded beyond politics. Channel 4 News led with it. Newsnight cleared its entire rundown. Even BBC Question Time, broadcasting live from Newcastle, opened with a single, burning question: has British democracy just been bought? The panel was tense. A Conservative MP, a Labour shadow minister, a Liberal Democrat, a political commentator, and one empty chair. Reform UK had been invited but declined to send anyone. They don't need to defend themselves, the host said grimly. They've already won. The Conservative MP went first. Sweating slightly under the studio lights, he tried to sound measured. Look, donations are part of our democratic process. Lord Sainsbury gave £8 million to the Lib Dems. Blair took millions from £9 million. The Labour minister interrupted. From one man, who lives abroad, who profits from cryptocurrency linked to Russian sanctions evasion. You're really going to sit there and defend this? The Tory MP bristled. I'm not defending reform. I'm defending the system. If we start attacking legal donations, where does it stop? It stops. The Labour minister shot back. When billionaires stop buying political parties, the audience erupted. Some clapped, others booed. The host struggled to regain control, but the real drama wasn't on television. It was happening behind closed doors, in private messages, in emergency meetings convened in Westminster pubs and party headquarters across London, because by nightfall, 3 simultaneous crises were unfolding. Crisis 1. The Conservative implosion. At 7:43 p.m. A leaked WhatsApp message from a senior Conservative MP hit the press. The message, sent to a private group of backbenchers, was blunt. We're finished. Badenoch can spin this all she wants. Reform has the money. They have the momentum. And we have nothing. Unless we act now, and I mean now, we're heading for extinction. The message suggested something unthinkable. A pact with Reform UK. We need to talk to Farage, the MP wrote. Merge, align, whatever it takes. Because fighting him is suicide. The leak sent shockwaves through to CHE. Within minutes, Kemi Badenoch's office issued a terse statement. The Conservative Party will never merge with Reform UK. We are a serious party of government. They are not. But the denial felt hollow. Because privately, some Tories were already having those conversations. One former minister, speaking off the record to the Times, admitted, there's a faction of us asking whether we can survive alone. The electoral math doesn't work. Labour on the left, Reform on the right. We're being squeezed to death. Another MP put it more starkly. Farage is offering us a choice. Join him or be destroyed by him. By PM, a splinter group of 5 Conservative MPs, hard right, Eurosceptic, furious at their own leadership, issued a joint statement. They stopped short of defecting to Reform, but they praised Harborne's donation as a vote of confidence in patriotic politics and called on Badenoch to learn from Reform's success. It was a shot across the bow, and everyone knew it. The Conservative Party wasn't just losing donors. It was fracturing. Crisis 2. Labour's silent panic. Labour should have been celebrating. Their main rival was imploding. Reform was splitting the right-wing vote. This should have been a gift, but inside Labour HQ, strategists weren't celebrating. They were terrified, because the polling they were seeing, private polling, not yet public, told a different story. Reform wasn't just pulling Conservative voters. They were pulling Labour voters too. Working-class voters in the Midlands. Red wall seats Labour had clawed back in 2024. Former miners and factory workers who'd voted Labour for decades and were now listening to Farage, one Labour strategist, speaking to The Guardian on condition of anonymity, put it bluntly, "We thought reform was a Tory problem. It's not. It's our problem too. Because if Farage professionalizes his operation with this money, if he builds a real ground game in the north, we're vulnerable." The nightmare scenario. A three-way split. Labour holds the cities, Conservatives cling to the shires, and Reform sweeps the post-industrial towns, the coastal communities, the forgotten places that swung Brexit and haven't looked back. And in a first-past-the-post system, that kind of split doesn't produce a Labour landslide. It produces chaos. So Labour stayed quiet. No more attacks on Reform. No more mocking Farage. Just silence. Because they didn't know how to fight him yet. And silence in politics is fear. Crisis 3. Farage's gambit. At 9:34 p.m. Nigel Farage posted a video. Not a polished campaign ad. Not a scripted speech. Just him, sitting in what looked like his office, phone in hand, speaking directly to the camera. "Good evening," he began, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "By now, you've all heard the news. £9 million. Record donation. The establishment is losing its mind." He paused. "Let it hang. Let me tell you what this really means. It means we're winning. It means the people who run this country, the politicians, the donors, the lobbyists, they're terrified. Because Reform UK isn't playing by their rules anymore." He leaned closer. "They'll call us extremists. They'll dig through Christopher Harborne's past. They'll scream about dark money and foreign influence. But here's what they won't do. They won't ask why a British patriot chose to invest in us instead of them." Another pause. "Longer this time. I'll tell you why. Because we speak the truth. Because we fight for you. The British people they forgot. The workers they abandoned. The towns they left to rot." His voice dropped. Quieter now, but harder. "This £9 million isn't just money. It's a message. From everyone who's sick of Westminster. Everyone who's sick of being ignored. Everyone who wants their country back." He stared into the camera. "And we're just getting started." The video ended. Within an hour, it had 3 million views. By midnight, 7 million. Farage supporters shared it endlessly. Critics dissected every word, but the impact was undeniable. Farage had taken the biggest controversy of the day, a donation that should have buried him in scandal, and turned it into a rallying cry. He wasn't defending, he was attacking, and it was working. By p.m. Reform UK's membership website crashed. Too many people trying to sign up at once. The party's donation page, which accepted Bitcoin, remember, saw a surge of small contributions. £50 here, 100 there. Thousands of individual donors flooding in. Energized by Farage's defiance, the establishment had tried to make this about oligarchy, about corruption, about foreign influence. Farage made it about them versus us. And in that framing, he always wins. But in a quiet office in Whitehall, a senior civil servant was reading through the Electoral Commission's full report. Not just the headlines, the fine print. And they found something. Buried in the data, beyond Harborne's 9 million, were dozens of other donations to Reform UK. Smaller, yes, but consistent. Repeat donors, businessmen, property developers, former Conservative backers. A slow, steady migration of right-wing money from the Tories to Reform. This wasn't just one billionaire's whim, this was a realignment. The civil servant drafted a memo, marked it urgent, sent it to the Cabinet Office. The subject line read, "Reform UK Financial Trajectory Threat Assessment." The first line, "If current trends continue, Reform UK will outspend all major parties combined by 2028. The memo landed in inboxes across government at 11:47 p.m. One slept easy that night because the question was no longer if Reform UK could compete. It was when they would win. And as midnight struck over Westminster, as lights dimmed in Parliament and the last journalists filed their stories, one truth crystallized in the cold December air. British politics had just changed forever. Nigel Farage stood in his office, looking out over London. His phone buzzed endlessly. Messages of congratulation, offers of support, interview requests from every outlet in the country. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet, constituency targets, polling data, resource allocation. He wasn't celebrating. He was planning, because £9 million wasn't the endgame. It was the opening move, and Farage was playing to win. The morning after comes quietly. And no sirens, no breaking news chirons. Just a slow grey dawn breaking over a nation that woke up different than it went to sleep. Bym. The newspapers hit the stands. The Telegraph. Farage's fortune reform revolution funded by crypto billions. The Guardian. Democracy for sale. Record donation sparks calls for reform. The Sun. Characteristically blunt. 9 million reasons to worry. The Daily Mail ran a split cover. One half showed Farage, triumphant, fist raised. The other showed Kemi Badenoch, looking strained, isolated. The headline between them: The Fight for Britain's Soul. In coffee shops across London, commuters scrolled through their phones in silence. On the tube, strangers avoided eye contact, earbuds in, news alerts pinging. In Yorkshire, in Wales, in Scotland and Northern Ireland, people read the same stories, saw the same numbers, and felt the same uneasy question forming: what comes next? Because this wasn't just about £9 million anymore. It was about what that money represented. A line crossed, a threshold breached. The moment British politics stopped pretending it wasn't being reshaped by forces ordinary people couldn't control. In Westminster, the machinery of government ground on. Prime Minister's questions was scheduled for noon. Committee hearings, debates on housing policy, NHS funding, infrastructure. The boring, essential work of governance. But everyone knew the real story was happening elsewhere. In conservative associations across the country, members were meeting in church halls and community centers, voices raised, tempers flaring. Some demanded the party tack right, embrace reform's populism, fight fire with fire. Others warned that compromising with Farage would destroy what remained of conservative credibility. One elderly member in Hampshire, a Tory voter for 60 years, stood and said quietly, "I don't recognize my party anymore, and I don't know if I can vote for it again." She sat down. No one argued. In Labour strongholds, a different anxiety simmered. Union leaders convened emergency calls. MPs in marginal seats, the ones Labour had won by slim margins in 2024, started running their own internal polls. What they found didn't comfort them. Reform was no longer a protest vote. It was a second choice. And in towns where industries had died, where promises had been broken for decades, where people felt abandoned by both major parties, reform was starting to look like a first choice. One Labour MP, representing a former coal mining town in the north, spoke to a local radio station that morning. The host asked if he was worried about reform. He paused. Too long. "I'm worried," he finally said, "that people have stopped believing politics can help them. And when that happens, they don't vote for hope. They vote for anger." The host pressed, "Is reform anger?" "Reform is a mirror," the MP replied. "It reflects what we failed to do." But away from the headlines and the panic, something quieter was happening. In universities, political science professors were updating their lectures. The 2025 donation figures, they explained to students, weren't just data points. They were signposts, indicators of a democracy under strain, where money and influence flowed not from citizens, but from individuals so wealthy they could reshape the political landscape alone. One professor at Oxford, in a lecture hall overlooking the city's dreaming spires, put it simply: democracy requires equality of voice. But when one person's voice is £9 million loud, and yours is a single vote, can we still call it equal? A student raised her hand. "So what do we do?" The professor had no answer. Across the country, campaign groups were mobilizing. Transparency International drafted legislation proposals for donation caps. Spotlight on Corruption launched petitions. Electoral reform advocates renewed calls for proportional representation, arguing that the current system was vulnerable to exactly this kind of financial manipulation. But proposals take years. Petitions gather dust. And elections are won with money now, not reforms later. By afternoon, the initial shock had faded into something deeper. Not outrage, not panic. Resignation. In a YouGov poll conducted that day, 63% of respondents agreed with the statement: British politics is controlled by wealthy donors, not ordinary voters, across party lines, across age groups, across regions. 63. That's not a political problem. That's a crisis of faith. And yet, life continued. Children went to school. Workers clocked in. Trains ran late. The NHS waited lists grew. Bills piled up. In the grand sweep of daily life, £9 million to a political party felt distant, abstract, irrelevant, but in the background, in the machinery invisible to most, the money was already moving. Reform UK hired new staff, opened offices in target constituencies, commissioned detailed polling in swing seats, bought ad slots for the May local elections, recruited candidates, built databases. The £9 million was being transformed from a number into power, and by evening, as darkness fell again over Britain, a strange calm had settled. The Conservative Party issued no further statements. Labour focused on policy announcements. The Liberal Democrats called for reform but didn't push hard. The media, exhausted by a day of frenzy, moved to other stories. It felt, almost, like the moment had passed, but it had end. It had just sunk deeper, because the real danger of Harborne's donation wasn't the spectacle, it was the precedent. If £9 million was acceptable today, what about 20 million tomorrow? What about 50 million from a consortium of donors in the next election? What happens when politics becomes a bidding war, and only billionaires can afford the entry fee? Britain had always prided itself on its democracy. Messy, yes. Imperfect, certainly. But fundamentally fair. One person, one vote. The great leveler. But tonight, that myth felt thinner. One person, one vote. Unless you have £9 million. Then you have 9 million voices. In his office, Nigel Farage closed his laptop. The spreadsheets were updated. The strategy was set. The path was clear. He stood, stretched, looked once more out over the city. Somewhere out there, in council estates and market towns, in pubs and living rooms, millions of people were still angry, still forgotten, still waiting for someone to fight for them. And Farage knew, with the certainty of a gambler who's seen his cards, that anger was currency. More valuable than £9 million, more powerful than any donation, because money buys campaigns, but anger wins elections. He turned off the lights outside. London hummed, indifferent, eternal. The Thames flowed dark and silent beneath Westminster Bridge, and history, as it always does, moved forward, whether Britain was ready or not.